morning, everybody, and welcome to this first session of Cpdp. I'm Daniel Métayer. I'm Research Director at INRIA, which is a National Research Institute for Computer Science in France. I have a great pleasure of chairing this session with Gloria González Fuster as a moderator. Gloria is a research professor here at VUB, working on fundamental rights, privacy, data protection, among other topics, I think. So as you can see from the title, Cpdp puts the focus on Internet of Bodies this year. So for this first panel, we decided to put emphasis on physical tracking. So the extension to the physical world of the tracking which is already in place on the internet. So as you probably know, physical tracking is more and more common today. It involves a variety of devices, sensors, beacons, mobile phones. It has a variety of applications. It can be useful, for example, for retailers to know how much time their customers spend in a given section of their store. It can be also useful for a museum to know when a visitor is in front of a given painting. It can be also useful for urban planning, for crowd management. So it has many applications. But as you also know or guess, it also has, it raises serious privacy issues. So there are many questions I would like to see debated during this panel. For example, what are the actual privacy risks, and what are potential countermeasures? What are also the benefits or the opportunities of physical tracking? What recommendations could be made regarding the e-privacy regulation and also the implementation of the GDPR to reduce the risks of physical tracking? Also, what about self-regulation and self-regulation initiatives such as a Future of Privacy Forum Code of Conduct? Can they help improve the situation? So, as you can see, there are really many topics, many issues to be debated, and we have prominent speakers of different backgrounds around the table. So I know they have a lot to say, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to say more. And I would just like to introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Mathieu Cunche. Mathieu is a computer scientist. He's assistant professor at INSA, which is a national engineering school in France, in Lyon. Mathieu is an expert in privacy, of course, and especially in the context of wireless communications. So things like beacons, sensors, MAC addresses, they don't have any secret for Mathieu. And Mathieu is going to give us an introduction to the technologies used for physical tracking and also the potential risks and maybe countermeasures against these risks. So Mathieu, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Can I have the slides, please? Thank you. So I am a computer scientist. I'm going to give you, I'm going to share my point of view on this physical tracking thing. First, there are many ways, many technologies that can be used to track people. And I think for the sake of clarity, it's good to focus on one specific technology. And we decided here to focus on Wi-Fi-based tracking. That is commonplace today, and it's also very close to Bluetooth tracking. So we're going to focus on that, but we can discuss any other technology later. So it's it's about Wi-Fi, and in Wi-Fi there is something that is very important. It's called the service discovery. It's used by devices to discover the access points that are around them. This means that your device, when it will be searching for access point like this, whenever the Wi-Fi is actually on, it will send messages called probe requests. And those messages, they will contain one specific element that can be used for tracking. So those messages are sent whenever you are connected to a network. So when you have your phone in your pocket and you are not connected, your phone is still emitting those messages. And inside those messages, there is one important element that is called the MAC address. So this MAC address is a unique identifier linked to your phone. So it can be used to uniquely identify your phone, but also the owner of this phone. And this is this identifier that is used for tracking. And how do you track people? It's basically by putting this kind of sensors in an environment. You put them in a place, and those sensors, they can scan the wireless channel, and from this channel, they can extract the MAC address that the surrounding devices are sending. And using these kind of sensors, you can deploy them inside a physical place, like here, a shopping center, an airport, a street, and you can start to monitor the crowd. So basically, your sensors, they will pick up all the MAC addresses of the people around, and you can use that to count how many people are there today, to count how frequently they come back, but you can also do more specific profiling, so focus on one specific person and know more about this person. Of course, in here we are talking about passive collection of personal data, because this MAC address is a personal identifier, and it's totally passive because most people, your device is just emitting signals, and those sensors, they are just passively collecting those signals. And most people are not aware of that. I don't know if you are, but when I talk to people, even computer scientists, most of them are surprised by this kind of technology. And to deal with those privacy issues, there are some solutions that have been proposed. The first one is supposed to address the transparency and the control of users regarding this collection of data. And we have seen appear these kind of stickers that are presented at the entrance of location where Wi-Fi tracking systems are operating. And those systems you have, on those posters, you have the fact that there is a system operating, and here you can have a link to a website to opt out. I wonder if this kind of posters can be seen by everybody, and is it really enough practically, and is it also compliant with the current regulation and the next one? We'll see that later maybe with all the panelists. A second point when we deal with personal data is you may want to anonymize this data to reduce the risk. One thing that have been adopted is to use a hash-based anonymization. So you use a cryptographic hash function to transform the unique identifier, the MAC address, into something that is supposed to be impossible to put back into the MAC address. So in fact, this is not real anonymization, this is just pseudonymization, and in practice, there are some ways to reverse these things. So this is a good start, but it's not sufficient to provide real strong guarantees. So in fact, I've been studying this problem of anonymization, and there is no good solution right now to how to do that. And I think this is a big challenge. And how do we want to anonymize? How can we anonymize the data that is collected by such systems? So all the two things I've presented so far are the action that can be taken by the trackers, people collecting and managing the data. But they are not the only ones that have a role to play here. I want to mention the fact that also the mobile industry and standardization bodies like IEEE, they have a role to play here. Recently, well, not so recently, in fact, they started to notice this issue of Wi-Fi tracking, and they started to implement what we call MAC randomization. So your device, instead of using its real MAC address when it do the scanning, it will use a pseudonym that is generated randomly and changed periodically. So using this technique, your device cannot be tracked using the MAC address. So this is a good start. There are still some issues with that, but at least they are going in somewhere. They have some solutions to propose. And we believe that this kind of actions, they cannot be done only on the tracker side or on the mobile industry side. We believe that there should be some discussion between those two parties in order to improve the situation, and especially regarding the transparency, finding ways for devices to communicate automatically their preferences regarding the tracking and the collection of private data. Thank you.
Thanks, Mathieu. Perfectly on time, so it's question time now.
So the idea is that we want this panel to be a little bit interactive, and you are allowed to ask one question to Mathieu about the technology that he explained, or why did he choose this technology. I have a question, but so after each speaker there will be time for one question. If there are no questions, Daniel, do you have a question, or can I ask this question? Why is this technology more important than the others in relation to
yeah, I didn't mention that, but Wi-Fi tracking today is commonplace. I think because it's very easy to collect the signals. The sensor I presented earlier is something that you can build and design for less than 40 euros. So the hardware is very cheap, available to anybody. And on the software side, it's also very simple to design the piece of software that can scan the channels and extract the identifier. Then after that, you need some infrastructure to process the data, but the first collection part is very easy. And I think this is one of the reasons why Wi-Fi, but also Bluetooth, it's very similar, are so popular today to track people.
Thank you. No, yes. So there's a microphone there. Have to get. You are invited to say your name always at Cpdp, but you're not obliged because you are tagged, so we know who you are. But yes.
That's fine. My name is Eike Gref, and maybe you can just name other technologies beyond Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. I heard about like frequencies that the human ear cannot hear, and maybe you have some more names just to note down.
Yeah. So there is the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth. They can be used to passively track the device because the device is emitting that. But you can also have technologies based on beacons, in which there is an app running on your mobile phone that is picking up signals that are coming from the environment. And those signals, they are generated by beacons, like Bluetooth beacons, they exist. But there are emerging technologies like ultrasound beacons. You have ultrasonic beacons in the environment that generate some sound. And these signals can be picked by the microphone of your device. So it means that an application that has the authorization to access the microphone can actually pick the signal and resolve that to a geolocation. So you don't ask for the geolocation, but still you get the geolocation of the user. There are also some initiatives based around visible light communication, so those light bulbs that are flickering at very high frequency, and this signal is very similar. It generates a unique signal that can be picked by the camera of your phone and can be resolved also to a location. Any signal that is generating environment can be used for tracking. For instance, Wi-Fi access point, they can be leveraged for tracking. So there have been some, I think in 2014, there was this company called InMobi that was shipping libraries for mobile application. And they were advertising that they were able to get the location of people without asking for the geolocation permission. And they were doing that by accessing the scan results of the Wi-Fi permission. So they were accessing to the list of the nearby Wi-Fi access point, and they were using that to pinpoint the location of people. So the FTC was not very happy about that, and they got fined. A bit. So these are the point is, I think there are many ways to do that, and the people who want to track us, they have a lot of imagination, and they will find a lot of ways to track us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mathieu. So we'll have time at the end of the session for general questions for all the speakers. So now our second speaker is Monica McDonald. Monica is a key member of the European industry consulting team in Informatica. She has a long experience in business, in software, and she has also worked a lot on the GDPR and its impact on the industry and on citizens. And so Monica is going to give us the perspective of the industry or the business on this topic. Monica, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniel. Right, so this is the first time Informatica has been represented at this conference, so I think it's worthwhile doing a quick introduction through what our customers are using our software for. So Informatica is a world-leading supplier of enterprise cloud data management software. So what does that actually mean? It means that, as Mathieu said, that we're very good at picking up signals, physical tracking, other signals, but it needs to be processed afterwards. And Informatica provides software that gathers data together, integrates it, makes sense of it through data quality routines, but also helps people govern and protect that data once it's in place. And so what this means is that we get to look at what people are doing end to end in many circumstances with the information and the data they collect, why they're doing that and what the benefits are. So a couple of examples are here from different industries in physical tracking, how it helps. The first one is a theme park, which also has a huge retail arm and also, by the way, some media as well. And what they're looking to do is the physical tracking in the park is all about queues, really. Queues at the restaurants, queues at the rides, queues at number of people in the actual shopping outlets and so forth. So they can alert people as to where the lower queues are or the shorter queues are. Say this might be a good time to get lunch, have you tried this ride? Trying to improve the experience of the park. But of course they don't take this physical tracking in the park and leave it in isolation. They actually link that with people's preferences that they've gleaned from past history as well. The second example is in building management. Now, this comes from a very large building management company. The primary business model is to lease out buildings and then manage those. So they're highly interested in demographic data, which helps their customers choose locations and buildings that are right for them in terms of how easy it is for public transport, the profile of the people who generally live in the area, not individuals, but just basic demographic details. So they can choose buildings where they can attract people who'd want to work for them. But they're also using physical tracking inside the building to understand how those buildings are used. Where do people move? What time do they arrive? What time do they leave? And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to get smarter in their buildings, smarter in their building management. And the final example is of a European airline who have just only managed now to build a repository that creates individual profiles for people who aren't loyalty members of their airline. So for a while, if you signed up to be a loyalty member, they could actually uniquely identify you and understand how you acted as a customer. And now they've done that for non-loyalty members as well by knitting together information from certain databases and points of interest that they have. They also use physical tracking in the airport because what they'd like to do is they're looking at the entire experience and that experience, a large part of that experience is actually in the airport, either waiting for your flight or when you're on arrivals as well. And they're looking at helping things like suggesting people, inviting people to the lounge based on if they're in the airport, how many people are in the lounge at that point, and who that people are they important customers to themselves or not. Now, if you look at the reasoning behind these, all of these companies will be sure to say that there's actually a purpose. So the theme park and the retailer wants to be inclusive. They want to make sure everyone's happy and feels included as part of the family. They don't want to be felt as intrusive because no one wants that. The building management company is looking at a green and productive environment. They really want to see people how they move in a building so that they know when they can turn down the heating, when they can turn off the lights, what's the right timer switches to put in and so forth. And the airline is looking at simpler, faster, and better customer experience. They really want to help customers enjoy their journey across all touch points. Now, the reason behind a lot of this physical tracking is because of the pressure that these companies are feeling from online enterprises, digital first or digital natives, which if you're online, you're being tracked every step of the way. People understand your journeys from the concept of I need to do something or I'd like to buy something, how you research what you're going to buy, what you choose, what you effectively have a look at but discard as an idea, why you do that, who influences your decision, and ultimately what the outcome is. And this is really the pressure stepping up. If you look in the news this week, was Amazon opened its first checkout list store in Seattle. It's been open to Amazon employees for a couple of years, and now it's open to the public. And that's just pure physical tracking, not necessarily from your mobile phone, from your mobile phone, but also facial recognition to find out who's moving through the store. Now what they see, this is a huge customer experience because shopping is in effect completely inefficient. You take things off the shelf, you put them in your trolley, take them out the trolley, put them on the checkout counter, take them off the checkout counter and put them in your shopping bag and go home. In this checkout-less store, you take things off the counter, off the shelf, put them in your bag and you walk out when you're done. Hugely efficient, great. They're focusing on customer experience, But of this, you have to be, the physical tracking of this is a necessary part. So what does this look like? If you look behind the scenes in the physical tracking, most of these companies have 3 dimensions of personal data that we can see. The first one is the contact information, who this person is, how can you get hold of them. And this is where consent is going to be fitting in terms of GDPR, is that you should have a single place where for each individual person or data subject, you understand the consents of what you can do and how you can do and how you can contact those people, how you can process their data. The second dimension is pretty large. It's the interaction and transaction dimension. So this will stretch everything from a direct transaction where money has changed hands, or an interaction. An interaction can be anything from looking at your Facebook page, cruising your website, phoning the customer call center, or in this context, physical tracking as well, that you actually come within a store, be picked up with the scanners by the mobile beacons, by the Wi-Fi network, or in an airport, and then people actually know where you are. And that's all matched with the other information, which the third dimension is relationships. Now, retailers in particular have been interested in householding for a long time. They're very interested in who you live with because this defines what you're likely to purchase. But now with the internet, there's so much more that you can get. If you friend someone on Facebook, you can pick up all the social relationships. And there's business relationships as well that you actually build. And these relationships are quite important because if you look at the airline, for example, your behavior when you travel for personal business or personal matters is very different than business travel in terms of who you travel with, what time you arrive at the airport, do you use the business lounge, how much food do you buy, and so forth. Now, the challenge that we all have in terms of privacy is this is not one system that sits behind this. Each one of these little circles here could be multiple systems. So the concept of being able to opt out of physical tracking when you have maybe 10 or 15 stores all running slightly different technology is really challenging because how do you know it's the same person? Are those systems linked together? Do you have a single view of that individual data subject within your organization? And the answer is quite often no, which has its benefits because they don't know everything about you. They can't knit it all together. But it has huge disadvantages in terms of exposure to data being available. There's just so much more to secure. The other challenge that they have with this is they don't actually know who has access to the data. And the reason behind that is if companies have a very good data warehousing and analytics environment, people will use it. If they don't, they take extracts and put them on a server somewhere and use that. And if those extracts are not well protected, they're actually taking personal identifier information and making little pockets of information around the organization which are undeclared and unmanaged. And so that's the real challenge. And if we're going around looking at GDPR, it has really brought this distributed and uncontrolled nature of data management and ungoverned data to light. And for a couple of years, well, for 18 months now, Informatica has been asking some very easy questions, but people are struggling to answer it. Can you even identify all the systems that have private, personally identified information in it? The answer is frequently no, because of these pockets of information and people who want to test new technologies like physical tracking, and they spin up a server somewhere in the cloud, and they test this physical tracking, but they don't actually, it's a pilot, so we're not really going to tell anyone about it just yet. The second part of that is, do you actually understand what those systems are used that has personally identified information in it? Have you documented, or can you document who has access to it and what the purpose of that system is? This is quite important in terms of consent, because if you don't consent to your data being used in a specific way, then the systems that use that data for physical tracking or for loyalty points or for marketing messages must understand that. Data masking. How do you protect and apply data controls? So beyond your firewall and your hardening of your environment, how do you protect data internally as well? A lot of data leaks are from internal people because they have access to the systems. So how do you make sure people can only see personal data and individuals if they have a good business need to do that and if the person has consented? And then the final aspect of the questions, which turns out in many cases to be quite tricky, is how do you actually manage consent on a global basis across all your business divisions, organizations, marketing programs, physical tracking points, and so forth? And if someone wants to enact their rights in terms of what do you know about me, how do you gather all that data together to actually show them what data you have, allow them to be forgotten, and so forth? And given that this is a legislation, I think it's quite tricky for people organizations to get the money to do this. It's a highly expensive and challenging, and it requires organizational change. So what we've been trying to point out is that actually privacy should be a differentiator. You should be able to compete in the market with privacy as a differentiator, which will drive the investment in data management and data governance, which is necessary to enable privacy.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. I really like this expansive explanation that physical tracking is somehow an inevitable expansion of the online tracking. So you have the possibility to ask one question or two short questions to Monica. Yes, the microphone is there. You have to move. It's a physical exercise. Please. The fastest speaker. Tension. Yes, we can have two questions.
Hi.
Yes.
I'm Métayer, Delft University of Technology and Brussels University, Vrije Universiteit. I had one remark which I didn't quite understand. I think you had these three types of data that in the end are all either at least try to be connected to each other, and you said that informed consent was particularly important for the box on the left, like the normal contact information. And I didn't understand why you picked that out, because as far as I understand, informed consent would be applicable to all of those types of personal data.
Yes, so it's a fair point. So yes, informed consent is applicable to everything, but to actually implement informed consent, you need to hold it somewhere in a single record. Because to implement informed consent over distributed matters, so if you think that you've got 1,000 applications in your environment, some of these applications were put in the 1960s. They don't quite understand consent. They barely understand the concept of a single version of the truth, a single subject. So what we're proposing is that the consent goes off and is mastered at a global level, so that all these systems have a registry that they can check. Has this person approved to this data, or this application to be used, or their data to be used in this way? And then based on the technology of the system, which sits in the other areas there, they can then respond to that consent in the way that best suits them, which might be don't put the data in that system in the first place because they can't filter, or it could be that just leave out those records, that there's a flag on those records, that when you do your analytics or your marketing run, just leave out those records. So yes, informed consent is applicable everywhere, but you need to manage it just like you need to manage someone's email address or phone number.
Thanks.
Thank you. We will take the second question, please.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Turo. I was just curious. I don't even know how you begin thinking about informed consent, given the kinds of patterns you've discussed. How do you explain to a person in a relatively small space what exactly the data are going to be used for, given all of the patterns and circles you discussed?
I think that's what everyone's grappling with, to be completely honest. So people are still grappling with, the first thing is that every consent they've ever had effectively expires in May this year. So there's a whole reconsenting exercise. And when they reconsent, you can actually go out and reconsent at a very granular method. Now, at the moment, the consents that I've seen are very high level. But you'll notice now, as you go into more and more websites, that people are being more informative about what they're doing, and they are asking you for more consents. Do you consent to marketing? Do you consent to analytics? And the consents at this moment are very broad. And I think the physical tracking brings in a very interesting concept, because if people don't know that they're being tracked, they can't consent, which is effective against the law. But then how do you implement that without actually having at the entry to every building information that you are being physically tracked, and do you consent to that?
Well, beyond that, one more question. Are you going to say, do you consent to us tracking all of your friends and your relationships as you move through the world? I mean, would anybody say yes to that?
You'll be surprised. I think this is what it comes down to, is the value, is why are people trying to track this? Is because they're trying to understand you as an individual to give you a personalized offering. This is, in effect, this is what we're expecting. Every time we go onto Amazon or Google, this is exactly what we're expecting, and this is what companies are trying to replicate in the physical world. So if it's what people in general, not necessarily individuals in this room who are particularly concerned about privacy, if this is how people in general expect to live their lives, that they go, I need a drink, and suddenly miraculously a cold drink of their personal preference for that time of the day, that day of the week appears in their hand, life is good. But in order to do that, you need to consent. So it's all about the way you word the information. If you go out and say, can I please follow everything you ever do, which is, by the way, what every online company pretty much does, and who you speak to, and when you speak to them, and what you say, you're going to say no. But if you say, would you like me to use your personal data to help enhance your relationships and keep you in touch with your friends and suggest appropriate offers, people go, that doesn't sound too bad. So it's all about the wording, I think, is the answer to that.
Okay, you have to add the risks, but that's a whole
Yeah.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks for the questions. So let's move on to the third speaker. Our third speaker is Anna Fielder. Anna has been a consumer and privacy advocate for a number of years. She's now a senior policy advisor to Privacy International and to TACD. TACD is a Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue, which is a network of organizations representing consumers on both sides of the Atlantic. So I think Anna is going to give us a point of view of consumers and TADC on physical tracking. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I found Monica's and Mathieu's presentations absolutely fascinating and educational. And Monica, thank you very much for showing that Sam Smith complex circle relationships, because you know that shows exactly what we are grappling with. In addition, as Mathieu pointed out very well, we're not just talking about one form of data gathering. An example is the fact that we're going to be increasingly tracked across whole cities as they become smart and lay the foundations for that. An example is the whole of the City of London is covered by a Wi-Fi connectivity, which means that it's also tracking people that live and work there. So to us, as Monica has pointed out, location services are very beneficial and can be very beneficial to society, but the key is how to achieve the right balance between these amazing technologies that works in the user's interest and the public good without betraying their personal life and their privacy. And we feel as consumer and privacy advocates that at the moment the balance is heavily inclined towards the commercial interests. Once the data is surrendered by a device, its owner retains very little control, if any, over what can be done with it. And if you don't believe this, please have a look at what the websites of all the companies offering Wi-Fi and Bluetooth-based location and tracking services, even those companies that subscribe to a code, they heavily feature and predominantly advertise their detailed profiling and tracking capabilities for advertisements, targeting and retargeting to maximize clients' revenues. I give you a typical quote: integrated video, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth system to capture every customer, every important stop. We custom tune the system to drive the accuracy you need. So to us, all this does not amount to essential protection of the rights and freedoms of the individuals. What do people themselves think about it? And Monica, you wrote a really good blog about this, which I read recently. Survey after survey, both by private and public bodies, point out that people do care in large majority proportions about their personal data, and that without proactive and positive actions, people's trust will increasingly diminish. To quote the Pew Research Center in the US, corporate and government interests are not motivated to improve trust and protect the public. There's a big economic cost as well in not providing proper protections, whether technological or legislative. A government survey in the US recently showed a third of consumers are refraining from online economic and other activities due to privacy concerns. And EU official surveys show exactly the same figures. So what are the solutions? Well, as Monica also pointed out, they're very complex. We need both technological privacy by design solutions, which do not amount to just switching off our phones, and policy solutions. With regards to GDPR implementation, and that will probably be a discussion that we need to have, I think particularly interesting is the new accountability principle, in that all those using physical tracking should be able to demonstrate compliance with the requirements to be lawful, fair, transparent, and to collect for a specified, explicit and legitimate purpose. In the case of physical tracking in a confined space, this means just providing an instant needed service. And what would be the legal basis for processing? Opt-out is unlikely to meet GDPR consent requirements, again, as Monica pointed out. If you rely on legitimate interest, how can you demonstrate that you don't prejudice the interest and rights of the data subject, as you cannot do a case-by-case assessment? And how are you going to provide information in a transparent, simple, and accessible way? Other rights apply if the data is merely pseudonymized. Perhaps one solution is to have a bit similar to cigarette packets health warning system. As you enter a tracking zone, you get a pop-up on your phone that says you are entering a Wi-Fi tracking zone. Do you like to be tracked? Yes, no. If you want more information, go to this website. In reality, how many people going through an airport have time, you know, with their kids and luggage and everything to go and find out more information? I think we need detailed guidelines from authority, and the recently released guidelines on profiling by the EU data protection authorities cover many of the issues related to that, including guidelines regarding targeting for advertisement purposes, but there is a need to expand specifically on these physical tracking issues. Codes of conduct, I'm sure Jules will talk to us a bit more about this. From our perspective, they are fine, providing they are based on a legal regime and are properly monitored and enforced. The GDPR actually envisages codes of conduct approved by supervisory authorities, including by companies not subject to legislation, and providing such codes are monitored and accredited and demonstrably independent third parties. E-privacy regulation, well, that will apply as well, and as you know, it's still in the cooking, and it had a mere exception for this kind of tracking, which required notification only. Due to the work of my excellent colleagues at the European Digital Rights and their members, this has improved when going through the Parliament process, but it's now in the Council and the trilogue, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. Finally, least by not least, the GDPR also empowers NGOs that work in this area to focus on privacy, to take action, and there is little doubt that they will and we will. This will include investigations, subject access requests, complaints to authorities, but also, if necessary, taking legal actions. And given the existing information asymmetries and power imbalances, including in the case of this covert tracking, digital rights organizations around Europe have an increasingly important role to play. But I'm looking forward to a good discussion with the panel.
Thank you very much. It's the physical moment. You can get up and ask a little question for Anna. Nobody feels like getting up?
No, I silenced everybody.
So we can have questions about assessing the implications, questions about the policy solutions. I think for me it's very interesting the transparency, the issue of transparency, because it's coming back. That seems to be the big challenge, transparency. And in light of the GDPR, I think transparency is not just an end in itself. It's important to inform people, but it also has an instrumental character. You have to inform people so indeed one day they could use their rights on their own or with the help of NGOs. So if there's no transparency, there is little hope for exercising rights. If you don't know you're entering a Wi-Fi track zone, you will not do something about it. So how do you, whether your hopes about transparency, is it really going to improve?
Well, this is a very good question because the GDPR requires a very simple, clear transparency solution. And as Monica pointed out, this is actually very difficult in case of this covert tracking. You also have to bear in mind people's behavior. People tend to need information when they need it. When they are busily going through an airport or a shopping mall, they are concentrated on something else. They are not going to seek information on secondary issue. Therefore, I'm quite cynical about these databases where you register your preferences. Surely there'll be a large proportion of people in the know that will do that. But I don't know if the majority of the population will do that very easily because it's not something you think in your daily life. Therefore, some kind of instant pop-up at the point of action is probably the most logical way to go about it. I mean, the cookies in the cookie directive at the moment, people don't take action on them, but at least they have taught the population what cookies are. So these constant pop-ups, maybe they'll teach people and they'll go and inform themselves better.
Thank you. So you're still all sitting down? No questions now, but you can then think about bigger questions for the general discussion. And yes, we can move.
Maybe I will pop over there.
You want to get physical.
To see the screen. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Anna. So our last speaker is Jules Polonetsky. Jules has worked as a chief privacy officer for big companies like AOL and DoubleClick, I think. He is now a CEO of Future of Privacy Forum, and the Future of Privacy Forum has published a few years ago a code of conduct for mobile location analytics. And they have also set up a website on which you can opt out for mobile location tracking. So I think that Jules will tell us more about this and how this could address maybe some of the questions raised by the previous speakers. The floor is yours, Jules.
Thanks so much. The microphone is good. You can hear? Good. So a little bit about us, but not too much about us. We try to do the practical things that day-to-day move privacy and data protection forward. So when you do that, you do things that are imperfect. You do things that are, what can I get companies, civil society, academics to agree to that makes the world a little bit better, a little more control, a little more transparency. And that is a challenging place to be because it's never good enough. So at the end of the day, there are those who would have liked more. And then there are companies who are complaining, why do I have to do this? It's not working, it's ineffective, it's costly. So we spend lots of time being criticized by sometimes civil society, sometimes companies, sometimes academics, and usually if everybody is a little bit unhappy, you've probably found the opportunity to move things forward. So that is our life. So let's talk about some of the challenges. And before I go through the slides, the good thing about maybe going last is you hear all these interesting things that come up, and then you're like, you know what, I have things I actually now want to say that are more interesting than my slides. So let me maybe give a couple of brief thoughts, and then I'll actually jump in. So anybody flew in through Brussels airport today? Yesterday, ever flown in through Brussels airport? Yeah, of course, most of you have. So do you know the company Blip Systems? Because they're the company that does the tracking here in Brussels and in Oslo and in Copenhagen and in Edinburgh and in many European airports. So I'm always interested in transparency for two reasons, right? Hopefully with GDPR and with broad ideas about transparency, individuals will have more information and make decisions. God forbid the online cookie banner experience starts happening as my physical life now starts popping up every time I walk down the street. We'll have people destroy their phones or break windows if literally walking through every airport and through every store and through every hallway sort of gives me more of those cookie banners. We need to do better. I take Anna's point, which is we need methods to do this, but I think we have to figure out how the designers and engineers can implement this in a way that gives me, you know, smarter technology. I don't know if any of you have seen the work of Norman Sade at Carnegie Mellon, who's designing artificial agents, right? Because this has now become too complex to think that we're going to do this with our thumbs when we have such nuanced preferences. Because even if I say yes or no, well, maybe tomorrow I actually do want it, or maybe this morning I do want it. Some very interesting research by Professor Alessandro Acquisti, also of Carnegie Mellon, has shown that sometimes in the course of one day, I have different privacy feelings about the same issue depending on what has happened that day. Maybe I learned that someone else made a different decision and that influences me. Maybe I'm in a rush. Who knows? So we have this complex situation where our choices and our intent can be very different. And where is the technology that can help in the areas that we do want nuanced machines, not just on the other side of us making decisions about us, but actually perhaps empowering us to be more sophisticated and be the sophisticated consent manager. Our EDPS in his recent Privacy by Design comment sort of said, look at this complex world that has been created with ad systems and so forth in, you know, milliseconds, making smart decisions about what to show me. Where is the user side of this innovation making these smart decisions? So one thought there. A second thought about transparency is, with the best transparency, many people are going to go about their business. They're too busy. They won't take the time. The transparency there is for civil society, is for advocates, is for academics to understand what's going on. So I'm always interested in understanding. A lot of the companies will call, they'll talk to us. Others won't. I've never been able to get blip on the phone. They said there's no privacy problem. They're in Europe. They follow European data protection law. Why am I interested in what they do? I said, well, I can't find a privacy policy on your site. I want to understand what you do. Well, there's a PDF somewhere, so I found it. But again, I'm interested. Okay, they are doing some interesting things. They're only keeping the data according to this PDF 1 day. So, okay, so maybe there's a lesser risk. They're doing some double layer of hashing. We'll let the academics take a look whether it's actually, you know, good enough, but their argument is, you know, they're doing a better job than others because of the technology that they're applying. And if you still don't like it, no, they don't want to participate in an opt-out, turn your phone off. So I'll leave to you, and I looked, when I landed this trip, I spent 15 minutes looking around to see if I could find any signs or anything like that, because I thought, like, if I'm interested and I'm really motivated and I look around for 15 minutes, I should maybe be able to find, you know, okay, go to this website or some information, and there isn't. So we have work to do here, I think, and I want to look at some of the possible solutions. So these are, this is Brussels Airport. The benefit, right? We talked about the benefit. So here are some pictures. Maybe some of you received some of this benefit if you saw the wait time in the queue. Okay, why do we need this? Maybe the airport can have people stand there and count how long it takes and so forth. But clearly, if I want to, in a sophisticated way, manage the wait times, it's very complicated. The number of flights coming, the number of security people. Now there's bad weather in Edinburgh, so it's going to create these delays. And so having the information about the wait times and the way they change depending on what is also going on in the world, right? Incredibly useful. Now, again, I don't need weeks of data for this. Perhaps the fact that they have this for 1 day, you know, is enough. Maybe they're losing some ability to report over time. So there's clearly, if I was doing a legitimate interest test, and yes, we're going to talk about e-privacy, but if I was doing a legitimate interest test, I might be saying, well, okay, you've mitigated risks if you're setting a real serious deletion schedule. Oh, and what is the purpose? What is the interest? The airport also, I think, now has an app, so you can pull this information up and you can actually see it on your phone and maybe at home learn whether you have to show up 3 hours today early to the airport, right? That's the other advantage. What is currently the wait time. Many of us have cut it very close, and then all of a sudden you had no clue that the queue was 2 hours, and so I can get online and I actually can see for my flight and my gate, what does this look like? Okay, so there are obviously some interesting benefits, and this is a technology that has been in place in Europe under current national data protection laws for quite some time, and there's been some challenges and some case law and some decisions, so it's interesting. Again, GDPR is a game changer, of course, but all of a sudden, for lots of folks, it seems like people forget that we've had some of these laws and tests, and whether they've been enforced, well enough or aggressively enough, but there have been some history that we can at least learn from. How have the DPAs assessed these against the current language? Because many of this language is actually reflected and picked up. Here's a look at what one of these dashboards looks like, just in case you're wondering on the other side of the table, what is it that is being seen on the other side. It's typically at a dashboard level, but of course there is that more detailed layer of information underneath that we are worrying about and being concerned. So our goal when we came across this technology a number of years ago was, what can we do today better than tell people turn off your phone if you don't like this? I mean, that's not a good solution, turn off your phone. Or turn off your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, right? All of a sudden, everything is disconnected that you perhaps want on. And so we said, look, as a path forward until we can come up with better solutions, something maybe more granular on the device, more complicated methods that might be easier for users, let's at least create a place where people who do want to opt out can do so. And how do you create a sign that at least many companies use, so when I see it, I know, oh, that's got something to do with my phone tracking, right? Because I think the challenge of every store, every space, having their own sign somewhere on the back wall, I don't see it. Perhaps if there's something a little bit standardized with a little bit of a symbol, maybe I see it one time, I don't have to go research each time. Oh, that sign, that means this sort of, Wi-Fi or Mac tracking. So we did a little bit of work to create a standardized sign. We worked with the FTC. We took input from a number of the European, DPAs. And again, we're working in the world of what can we do so that tomorrow we have a better situation than today. So by no means perfect. I won't go through here, but just for those who are really interested, I flagged some of the interesting cases where regulators have either permitted, and typically permitted, again, this hasn't been a super secret technology that regulators don't know about, and if they knew, they'd go shut it down. They've struggled with, listen, there's clearly some use, but what is the balance appropriately with data protection? So in Sweden, again, seconds of deletion is what was required with a company called Bumby Labs. Of course, the regulators have all generally maintained that this is, of course, personal information. They haven't in any way accepted that, hashing or anything like that. Now, whether those are good ways to minimize, to pseudonymize, to take steps towards balancing interests on the legitimate interest, that's a different story. And so typically what we've seen regulators enforce across Europe is tighter retention periods, sometimes signage. One of their concerns often has been that signs are in a store or in an airport, but very often the tracking might capture you if you're just passing by, walking down the street. So what is an acceptable way to either only capture what you have given notice about, or to capture in a way that is broadly? And then recently we had a French decision where the CNIL said, no, this is not permitted. The plan there was to measure repeat visitors over a 4-week period, and the company said, hey, it's all anonymous, and they were not permitted to do so. All right, let's turn to e-privacy, because this is going to be a game changer. One of the reasons why we've been waiting to try to sort of update our code is we want to give people guidance about how to comply with law. And that's the useful and practical piece. And we now have e-privacy, which captures, of course, information coming off terminal devices. These are, in general, going to be captured. And we see, the back and forth. Again, this is an audience where people probably are reading every leaked draft and every public draft. And so you've seen some of the debates over whether a sign is enough, immediate deletion is enough, giving information about where to opt out, or do you do this with a strict informed consent, which for certain aspects, you heard from our speakers that this is an ecosystem today. This is not simply passively tracking Wi-Fi addresses, it is tying it to this broader system. So for the places where people are putting in an email and signing on to Wi-Fi and so forth, that will be the model that remains. I won't go through the next draft. I'll say just one thing that I think is important. We're talking about one slice of a technology. The broader notions of location tracking, maybe I look at this and I say, there's privacy implications, so I don't really care so much about the airport waiting time, there's too much risk, I don't care about retail and marketing. Let me take a couple of examples that are broader, where
one example.
There is an essential goal in society that we need to solve. Last year, there were 0 major commercial aviation deaths, right? President Trump somehow took credit that it's his strength on this, so maybe that was a little bit crazy, but it was a remarkable thing that for the first time in history, major commercial airlines, there were no deaths, right? We've gotten good enough because of the technology that each airplane knows where it is, knows where all the airplanes are, knows where the ground is, and we have a sophisticated system. Cars, every day, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths because our cars are stupid. They don't know where other cars are, and they're getting a little smarter, but they're relying on video cameras and LiDAR. The fact that 2 blocks down, a car just skidded is invisible to me until I hear a giant crash, and it's too late for me, right? Where is the technology, and it's rapidly under development, that allows vehicles to communicate with each other to say, I am here. Now you can see how everyone needs to be in, right? There can't be any, I'm going to opt into this, and everyone else, will be unaware, right? So we've got a major imperative, frankly, across many parts of the globe to make vehicle transportation more safely. And so we have to take a look at, yes, certainly transparency, but where are the places where we know that there's going to be a default in? Maybe there's a legal mandate and we have legislation enabling it, or maybe we don't have a legal mandate, but where we need people by default in because of the benefits of the technology, and what's the appropriate way to establish legitimate interest?
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
I'll
you
respond more to the question. Thank you.
Yes, please come back to us here. It's, so there's a possibility to ask one question directly to Jules, or we can just start to open the big discussion about the subject where you're really free to ask the questions that you wanted to ask. And we will also give the chance to the speakers to react to what has been said, whether it makes sense, there are useful, interesting solutions, there are not solutions, there are more questions. Mathieu, maybe?
Yeah, so I totally agree with the fact that there are some benefits, for instance, counting the people to, predict the queue, the waiting time. I think it's very interesting, but there is one other application that I find personally a bit scary is the profiling and the targeting. You showed this picture where physical tracking was just part of, a big network where data can be collected from many locations, especially online. And this show, I think, something that is currently appearing is what I call, and some other people call, cross-world targeting profiling. So basically, you can have, and some startups are advertising this kind of technology. So basically what you have is that you are profiled either in the physical world or in the digital world, online on your mobile phone. And data will be collected, and you can see in the other world some targeting. So for instance, you search online, you have a medical condition, and you may see later on in the street one of those signs on which there is a targeted message that pop up. And maybe I'm not comfortable with this big advertisement for Viagra just showing up at the bus stop when I arrive. And I think we need to, not me, but we need together to think where is the limit between the clear benefits and what is the boundary between these two worlds. And I think it's not clear today. We don't all agree on where is this boundary.
So you gave us a very easy one, right? Illegal today, sensitive data, express informed consent, whether anybody would actually ever say, yes, go track my medical information. Clearly under GDPR, under e-privacy, now we've got enhanced detail. If anybody was trying to get away with sensitive data in a very general. So these are the easy ones, right? The law is quite clear. Maybe it hasn't been applied rigorously previously. It is quite clear that sensitive data needs a very detailed, informed, express permission, and if it's going to be used for these broad ways, we should be able to hold those folks accountable. The harder questions to me are the ones that are perhaps less sensitive, where there is some public value, social value, and where doing the consent may be complex and hard, because it is detailed and complicated. But we should now, we have, for 20 years we had companies arguing it's not personal, the world will collapse, there'll be no marketing anymore. Well, the law has completed. We now need to make sure that it's enforced. But on the areas where there is complexity, we need to come together and figure out the good methods to achieve what are agreed on as legitimate goals that minimize and eliminate risk.
Anna, please.
Well, I think Mathieu has given a very good example, but I think we always tend on this panel to focus the discussion on highly technical things before looking at what is really the big public good and societal picture. And the fact is, as you said, Jules, we change our minds several times during the day, but there is a fundamental question that people are being tracked and surveyed in detail without knowing that they are and without their consent. I hail from Romania and I lived under Ceausescu. Just imagine if that kind of power was in his hand, Romania wouldn't be in the EU nowadays. So I think that we need to acknowledge the benefits. We need to think of technological solutions that bypass all this detailed collection and profiling of people, and I'm sure that all those clever minds that are thinking about how to do the tracking can also find alternative technologies, and I'm sure that the law can also apply in quite a simple way eventually. I know it's complex, but that doesn't mean we should shirk from it.
I will give the floor to Monica just to remind you this is your possibility to ask questions or say something that you want to comment through. Yes, please. Monica speaks, but you can already go there. Thank you.
So the key for me in all of this is one of the points Matthew made was that phones actually have the ability to masquerade as someone else or to disguise yourself. And I think that gives us a huge clue as to how we're going to control this physical tracking, because what I've seen in the law and in the Future Data Privacy Forum is essentially we're sitting at the basin of the Amazon River trying to go, ooh, hang on a minute, let's stop this now. And that's really, really challenging, because that's how data flows in a company. That's how it flows. It gets into one place and it goes everywhere. And it's hard to stop it. But if we go back to the people who profess to really care about our personal privacy, and Apple CEO stood up to the FBI and said, I'm not cracking that phone for you because it's a privacy issue. And we get them to, when you set up your phone, the very first time, when you turn on your computer the very first time, when you install a browser for the very first time, that's where we should have enforced privacy. Do you understand this? Would you like to do it? Do you understand this? Would you like to do it? Because people set up their phones at home when they have time. To have this at the airport is nice, but it's tricky because, as Anna pointed out, you don't have time to do it. The Future Privacy Forum is great. People will sign up to it. But to implement that in an organization, to try and control the way data flows, we're starting to get the technology to do that now. We're starting to get the technology to find out where the data is and protect it. But it costs money. And people are always fighting for IT budgets, so it's quite challenging. So if we go back with our privacy initiatives to the source of every technical device that could give out private information and allow people to control it at that point, then in terms of an individual choice, we've got a much better chance of understanding and educating them what they're setting themselves up for.
Thank you very much. One question, please.
Thank you. Andrew Adams, Meiji University in Tokyo. I think we're at the stage with physical tracking where we were maybe 15, 20 years ago with online tracking, in that we aren't aware yet of what the risks are going to be, but we can see possibilities. The trouble I see is that we're at this stage where people are saying, well, there's all these benefits, such as being able to tell how many people are in the line at security at the airports, and those are compelling benefits sometimes. But when we give consent, whether that's as individuals or whether that's as a regulator, it seems to be that consent is then for blanket use of that data. It's not targeted. Back in the EU DPD and many of the other data protection acts that gave rise to the DPD, the concept of purpose limitation was in there, and that's been ignored for 20 years. And I worry that that's what's going to happen with physical tracking. The example of a queue at the airport, they don't need to know that's me in the queue. They just need to know there's me, there's a person. They need to know how long that queue is, how quickly it's moving, how many people are being stopped. That's completely aggregate data. They don't need to know that's me the next time I go back. They don't need to know it was me last week and it's me this week going on another trip. And yet when we give permission for them to collect that data for one purpose, we seem to be giving them permission to use it willy-nilly entirely. And I take the point that was just made that we are perhaps now only beginning to get the technology on the IT processing end that can do that. But we need this purpose limitation really pushed down so that where the technology comes in that it can do it, it must do it.
Thank you. Reactions, maybe?
I have a lot of sympathy with what Monica said, that actually the logical way is to control the data within your phone and within your computer and within any other device. And I think I've seen this kind of proposal before by civil society. You know, if you monitor traffic, for example, you could measure distances and, you know, send anonymized signals rather than send a MAC address. And I don't know what Mathieu thinks about it, but it just seems to me more in keeping with behavior of people and behavioral economics than any other way of doing it. It would be interesting to know.
Jules, reaction?
I'll just say it's clear that for many, many years, real specific purposes have not been well spelled out, and if they've been well spelled out, it's been very broad and very general. I see companies around the world now, for the first time, many of them, which is sort of shocking because they've been subject to, you know, European data protection law, going through every example of how they use data internally. They've got to do it. They've got to show that they've done a data protection impact assessment, that they've shown their work, that they've got their purposes listed. People are working all over the world, right? Because everyone is captured to some degree if you're doing business and dealing with Europeans and so forth, to lay out those purposes. So let's see whether this experiment works. But we're going to see initially a flood of permissions being popped to people coming May 2018, and lots of detail being spelled out. Now, presumably, some will do it very nicely and well, because if they don't, they won't get consent, or they'll be, you know, they've got to send you information and you need to respond, so they have to do a decent job. Others, perhaps, will do it pro forma, and they'll be subject to, I think, critique and criticism, and now, you know, significant legal penalties. Number two, the biggest effect that I've seen of the GDPR has been many companies very clearly don't know where all their data is. And it's not that they're stupid, right? It's that they had a big system that was designed to do these three things very well, and now they want to do item number 4, and there's some interesting startup who says, hey, look, just load it here to my server, and very cheap, and we do it. And so all of a sudden, the Frankenstein monster has been built where there are these big, awkward systems that work, but if you actually ask the data protection officer or the CEO or the CEO, where is every one of these, and spell out all the reasons, they don't know. So what has happened is a long-needed data hygiene. People have spent a huge amount of money mapping where their data is for the first time, discovering what they actually have and how they're doing. Now, some of them are now going to be able to market better because they're linking together sets that have never been linked together before, because they want to be able to comply with subject access requests. So we can debate, you know, what the world will look like. But that's been happening. I'll say one last thing. Jeff Jonas, who is at the conference, who's one of the world's leading big data scientists. I'll stop here because we want to squeeze one more response.
Yes, and Daniel also wants to talk.
So I have time to prepare my answer. So yeah, having users, I mean, when they configure their devices, I mean, at this moment provide their choices, I think it's a good way to enforce privacy. We are actually with Daniel currently thinking of these kind of solutions. But if we go back to the Wi-Fi thing, Wi-Fi at the beginning was not designed for tracking. It was designed to provide wireless connectivity to devices. And today we have many devices that that have the Wi-Fi enabled. And there are some companies that are not using the Wi-Fi to provide this connectivity, but they are also using it to collect data on people. And this was not part of the standard at the beginning. We started to do that. And so the technology today is evolving so quickly, we cannot predict if this new technology that will appear tomorrow can be used in the future for tracking. And like I said earlier, there are very inventive people that can find ways to collect data on people with any new technology. So I'm afraid that it's very complicated to say, okay, any new technology, we should look at all the ways for tracking, and if tracking is possible, we should find a way to put this consent here and find a communication channel to transmit this consent, and I think this is very, very challenging.
So Daniel will talk, just 1 second before, because I think there's something interesting here, and all the discussion is who is responsible for doing something. Is it the technologies when they have this new idea of the technology? Is it the data controller, the owner of the little shop, the owner of the airport, the owner of the city? Who has to do something, and what's the useful thing for us that somebody does? But Daniel, I think that will be the last word.
Just a quick word to react to what Monica said, and Hannah, and then Mathieu. It's I think it goes in the direction of what we call sometimes privacy proxies or privacy agents or privacy software components. So components which could be installed, for example, on your mobile phone and which would know, on which you would have specified your preferences, your choices. And then you don't have, each time you have a potential collection of data, you don't have to do something. It's a component itself which decides on your behalf because the component knows your choices. So I think, personally, I also think it's an interesting direction for future research, and I hope it will be adopted in the future. Because I'm always very surprised, and this discussion today confirms these gaps that I see between technologies which are very complex, very sophisticated, which are used to, I would say, to collect personal data, if not to infringe privacy. And on the other hand, very simple technologies, if we can call them technologies, such as sign walls or posters to inform people about privacy policies. It's just like using middle-aged technologies to protect privacy on one hand, and on the other hand, very complex and sophisticated technologies to collect data. So I'm sure that there is a lot to do in terms of research in this area, and also investment for companies, because as we've heard from Hannah, it seems that many companies today have not understood what Monica said, that it could also be a differentiator in the future. So I think it's time to close now. I would like to thank you all for your attention and thank also, of course, the speakers for their interventions.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Perfect timing.